Do you want to learn how to get healthy, perform at your best, and create body composition changes that last? In this podcast, we're going to talk about all things fitness, nutrition, health, and mindset. You're going to learn how to create real results, and most importantly, how to maintain those results in the long run. I'm Johan.
I'm Kristin
and you're listening to Talking Nutrition.
Every time.
The countdown really messes me up. What's up, guys? Welcome to episode 7. Today we're going to talk about stress management. Now, stress is not necessarily a bad thing, and we were just talking about this before I hit record. People really demonize cortisol, right? And it's like this evil hormone that's going to mess you up. But today we're going to talk about what it really does and how stress can actually be a good thing in some cases, but also how chronically elevated cortisol, continuous stress, can really mess you up. So we're going to talk about what stress really is, what it means, the different types of stress. And we're going to get into the allostatic load. Basically, in English, the overall stress load that you have. Then we're going to get into the nervous system and how you can manage stress. And we're going to finish off with our personal top 3s of how we like to manage stress for ourselves. Now, related to this podcast, I actually wrote an article as well where I mention basically what we're going to talk about today, but also 20 methods that I think can help you manage stress. Now, it's going to be personal. Once again, it's always going to be personal, but I think you're going to benefit from that article. And then Kristin also wrote a post on that, which we're going to also link in the description. So I'll put my article down there, Kristin's post, and that post is about the effects of chronically elevated cortisol. So check that out. And yeah, let's get into the episode. So Kristin is going to start off with, what is stress?
Okay, so what is stress? I think many people, when they think stress, they are just thinking more on the emotional side. So maybe like family issues, relationship issues, work stress, financial stress, right? Those are kind of like emotional, but there is many different factors when it comes to stress that we often don't think about. So those are all stressors for sure. But there is one part within stress that we call perceived stress. So perceived stress is how we respond to a certain stressor. It's almost the feelings of like lack of control or uncertainty within something, right? So how we are responding to a certain stressor. Perceived stress can also be things like anxiety, depression, just mental stress in general. So outside of that, there's other stressors we often don't think about. Okay. So it could be, I have a whole list here. So there's poor diet is a stressor, blood sugar dysregulation, undereating or overeating, nutrient deficiencies, too much exercise, too little exercise, circadian disruption. So someone who is like a shift worker, there's a lot of circadian disruptions and stress happening there with that. Lack of sleep, poor gut health, inflammation, injuries. These are all stressors on the body, can be. One major one, I did kind of say it here, but one major one that a lot of people actually think is a stress reliever is actually a stressor on the system is exercise. I will say there are instances where exercise may not be a stressor for someone. So someone that, has a lot of body fat to lose and they're exercising to, lose that body fat, that is not going to essentially be a stressor on someone like that. But in general, exercise is a stressor for most people, but we think about it more. It's a stress reliever from the mental health side of things, but it's still a stressor from the physical. So a lot of the times when like my clients are going through a really stressful situation, or they're just stress cadets in general, we have to dial the exercise down a little bit, because to manage some of the stress on the system. It's one thing we are in control of when it comes to managing that stress. But it's like, it's the continual exposure, it's the chronic stress that ultimately creates dysfunction in the body. So when we have all of these things piling up, all of these stressors, we'll see downregulations in sex hormones, thyroid. We can see it impacting sleep because our cortisol is going all wonky. Poor gut health, downregulation in metabolism. But it's the chronic stress that does this, and not the acute. Like, we need stress, and Johan's going to talk about this. But it's all of these compiling on each other that does create the dysfunction, or the problems with our health down the road. All right. And then we're going to move on to how much can you handle? And Johan's going to hit that one up.
Yeah. And exactly like you mentioned, the prolonged stress, like that's really where it goes wrong, right? That's where it starts to have a negative effect. Because some temporary and acute stress is actually considered good stress. It can help you improve. That's where you stress the muscle. When you then recover, you become bigger, stronger, faster, etc. Acute stress can also help you improve your immune system, while on the other hand, chronic stress can do the opposite, right? It's more catabolic, related to breaking down tissue, which we don't want, right? We want to hold on to muscle as much as we can. It can also lead to chronic inflammation, insulin resistance, getting sick, basically faster aging, and much more. And injury is maybe a good one to mention too, because that's maybe one a lot of people who tend to overtrain a little might run into, and that's being injured, right?
I was a prime example of that.
Yeah, exactly, right? And I mentioned this, I think, in the first episode, like at some point at the gym at CrossFit, back when I was doing CrossFit still, it was like everyone was like walking around with these little weird, like not full blown injuries, but like it was getting there, And right. Some people did have actual injuries. Hey, might just be too much stress, which we don't really think of, because it's like, no, I like exercise, right? I like working out. Like for me, it's a stress relieving, activity.
Mentally.
Sure, mentally, but physically, it's still a big stressor. We'll get into actual stress management later on, but like that's also going to include, adjusting training load when you need to. But okay. It's all about finding the just right amount. Too little, it's not really going to do much, right? Very little stress or no stress is going to just keep you in your comfort zone. It's nice and safe, right? But it's also not where we actually grow and get better, etc. Now, too much for too long starts to work against you. And the right amount can help you grow physically and mentally. Now, back to stress management, right? What does it even mean? I think it's a term that's thrown around quite a lot. And without a lot of context, like people often say, like you see these posts, like you need to manage stress, and too much stress is not good for you. How do you do that? Is it about removing all the stressors, or maybe not? Like, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the nervous system and the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic state.
Yeah, so when we're talking stress, so when we're in a stressful situation, it's activating the sympathetic nervous system, which is fight or flight. So strenuous activity, danger, it's a threat to the system. It can, emotional stuff as well can create that response. You can see like heart rate increasing, the body tightening up, right? So it's fight or flight. You're ready to essentially get after something, right? It goes back to like our ancestors when this was really important for them when they were hunting, right? And gathering food. Now, the parasympathetic system it regulates the rest and digest. So it brings the body into a relaxed state, heart rate decreases, and this is where we can rest, relax, repair. So we want a balance of both of those, right? If we are constantly in the sympathetic state, in that fight or flight, we are going to, like I said, start to run into dysfunction. We have to come back to remembering that the body cares about two things, right? It cares about survival and reproduction. So when we are in a constant stress state, it's going to start to downregulate hormones like sex hormones. You'll notice things like, you could see like libido decreasing, right? All of these things start to downregulate because it's just not a priority for the body, right? When we see sex hormones downregulating, the body doesn't want to be bringing a baby in the world that you cannot care for if you're under this amount of stress, right? So it does that on purpose. It's a survival mechanism, right? So important to, like Johan said, we need this stress, but we also need to be making sure we are tapping into that parasympathetic state, because that's where we are repairing, right? So even something that a lot of people don't think about too is being in the fight or flight state. It will impact things like digestion too, right? Just not a priority when we're under threat. So we tend to see digestion issues pop up. And so, like someone who's working on gut health, that is always a main focus, is where can we manage the stress, right? So then once they start doing that, we see, bloating, just gut stuff in general start to improve. It's one of the biggest factors, I would say, in society as a whole. We have a lot of gut health issues right now, but we're also really, really stressed. Right. So, yes, there's so many different factors playing into that, but stress is one major one. When you're in a chronic sympathetic state, so fight or flight, like I said, you can see the sex hormones downregulating, thyroid downregulating. You can start to see like women losing their cycle, or like running into PCOS, or men low T. Women can have low T too, but it will impact your sleep, it will impact your mental health, and it can have an impact on fertility. But again, it's the continual state of being in the sympathetic, right? The fight or flight.
And this also shows up when, two examples, when in CrossFit, for example, or any sport, people overtrain, continue to diet and undereat. Or on the bodybuilding side of things, we get too lean, keep eating very little, keep dieting. We run into R.E.D.S, relative energy deficiency in sports, where there's not enough food, right? There's too much stress on the system. It's where women can, for example, run into loss of menstrual cycle, right? Men, as you mentioned, super low T. It's not going to be great just for overall health and performance. Pretty common, I think, right? Within sports in general, but also bodybuilding. How would you fix that when someone runs into that, right? Where they've been stressing the system too much. There's no menstrual cycle, for example, or there's low testosterone. We know someone is, not eating enough, overtraining, overstressed. How would you go about that? I'm putting you on the spot here.
Oh, that's okay. Well, you have to figure out where it's coming from. You have to get to the root of where it's coming from. So if it's coming from someone who's under eating and overtraining, we have to start eating more and pulling back on training. If it's coming from, work stress, it kind of depends. It's hard to say exactly like how I would attack it, because everyone's going to be totally different, right? And what's causing this. I do run labs with my clients and things like that. But again, it totally depends. It's hard for me to answer that question.
True.
It kind of is, because if I have a female who has R.E.D.S and doesn't have a cycle or anything like that, the simple answer is to start increasing calories and pulling back on training and adding in, parasympathetic movement like yoga, adding in stress management that like works for them. It's all about controlling the stress.
I wanted to add a scary one, and that is gaining body fat.
Mm.
Sometimes we have to as well. When we get too lean,
yes, we do.
that's a big one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I wanted to bring that one up, actually, because that's a scary thing, right? And it's not something a lot of people want to hear. And it's luckily, by the way, like it's luckily not something that's super common either, right? But it does happen. And, I know quite a few people who are into bodybuilding and stuff and who do run into that, right? Not necessarily very healthy to be super lean.
No. And it doesn't necessarily have to be super lean people either. Like I've seen people who just simply need to add more body fat, not because they're super lean, just because to optimize hormonal health, right? It can happen regardless if someone's super lean or not.
Yeah. Another reason to not keep dieting, right?
Right.
Okay. I was going to add one more. Is that cool?
Yeah.
And that's stress in relation to sleep. Because stress can really mess with your circadian rhythm. Cortisol kind of blocks melatonin production, which then makes it very difficult to fall asleep, if not impossible sometimes. Which once again is a big stressor to the body, right? Disrupted, circadian rhythm, not enough sleep. It's going to lead to shitty recovery as well. We kind of end up in this vicious cycle. Another reason to manage stress, right? To balance those two, parasympathetic and sympathetic. And a little exercise that I learned from Sam Miller, our mutual friend. And that's the drains and charges exercise. You know about that one?
Yep.
Right, yeah. I do that with some clients every now and then. We basically take a piece of paper, we write it down, drains and charges. And I just asked them, like, write down all the things that drain you, right? Physically and mentally on one side. And then on the other side, write down what you do to recharge. Also mentally, physically, etc. More than often, there's a whole lot on that stress side and not that much on the parasympathetic side. And that's really my point here. We can't just start looking at that stress side and say we got to remove all this, right? Because that's pretty much impossible in many cases. Maybe some here and there, right? But I would say let's focus more on the parasympathetic activities, right? Where we can bring you in that rest and digest state. We can try to lower cortisol. Which, by the way, another way to do that, lowering cortisol, might be eating carbs, right? Can spike insulin, lower cortisol, can then help you sleep. Which is why with some people, and this is one of those stress managing methods basically that I mentioned in the article. So why with some people, we incorporate a bedtime meal, which is pretty high in carbs for that reason. It can help you fall asleep. Now, it's not 200 grams of carbs right before bedtime, but, some in the evening can probably help you quite a bit. That being said, let's get into our top 3 favorite ways to manage stress with, first of all, ourselves.
So, what I will say about stress management is that I think we often think it needs to be like reading and journaling and like meditating, and there's nothing wrong with those things. But for some, it doesn't recharge us, or it doesn't bring us joy. I think that you need to do things that bring you joy when it comes to stress management. So for me, it's getting out and shooting my bow, right? That is it's an activity that makes me very present, right? I love it. I'm like focusing on just that. And so that's one of them for me. I love shooting my bow with Eric. Another really big one for me is walks in nature. It just brings me so much peace. I enjoy it. I also find I'm like very creative when I'm in nature, which is great. And then last but not least is I like doing absolutely nothing. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. but I like just laying down on my couch with Eric and Rose and watching a show. Like that to me, I am just totally relaxed. It brings me joy and I'm present. And those are my top three. It doesn't, for me, I've really tried to get into meditating. I'm more of like an active meditator, I think, more or less. But it just I couldn't get into it. And so I think a lot of people are in my shoes and they probably, and now they're stressed because they can't meditate. It's like, okay, no, we need to figure something out. So like, for example, one of my clients that checked in today, like her and her husband took a weekend and they went, and I think they stayed in a hotel, like even where they lived, and they just had dinner, and like it was an amazing stress reliever for her, right? It doesn't have to be reading. It doesn't have to be journaling. So just want to give you guys examples of that.
Very good point. I was laughing about the meditation one because, I mean, there is something to be said about giving it a shot, right? Because for everyone, it's going to be super weird in the beginning because we're not used to that.
Yeah, I've tried it so many times. I just can't do it.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Like, at least you try, But like, I think it's very uncommon these days for anyone. Almost no one does this, but like to sit down with your thoughts and with your eyes closed, and it's just you and your
totally
what's going on in your mind.
Yeah,
no one does that. Well, not no one. Barely anyone does that.
Yeah,
because it is weird, right? We're not used to that. So anything that we're not used to is going to be uncomfortable in the beginning. So I would say if you want to try it out, go ahead, because it might be great. But like I said as well, could also just be not for you. I like it personally. I haven't been doing it recently, I will admit, but I like it from time to time, On the other hand, for me, it doesn't work, for sleep. And I had a time a while ago where I could not sleep. I actually don't know what it was, probably stress, but I just couldn't sleep, and I would try to use Headspace. I would like put on like the sleep meditation thing, and I would get so frustrated. I would like just get more stressed from using that app, Yeah. And I was like, fuck, I can't fall asleep. So I was just making it worse. And it's like 4 a.m. You're still trying to like meditate, But then it's like, okay, just never mind.
Right.
But anyway, things that I do at the moment. Being in nature, that's the number one. Walks in general are nice, but when I'm in nature, and especially up here in Norway, which honestly is why I stayed here, is so good for me. Just being outside, especially if it's on the coast, to hear the water, or be up in the mountains. Just have, put up a tent somewhere and just chill, make a campfire or something. Like, that's the best shit, It's so good. That's my number one favorite way. And I got to do more of it, to be honest. Second is journaling and planning. And this might be a useful one because I think a lot of times when we're being unproductive or kind of like our thoughts tend to go everywhere, like sit down and write shit down, right? Whether you just want to plan for your week, right? These are the things I need to get done today, tomorrow, etc. Whether that includes your nutrition or not, right? Meal prepping, etc. You can plan for that because then you're less likely to forget. If you don't forget, you're maybe less stressed about forgetting your meal prep, right? Or journaling in general. I like to write down, stuff that I'm grateful for in the morning. I do that every morning. How I can do better personally, right? And a couple other things. But anyway, long story short, like you said, it's not for everyone. So I want you guys to think about the stuff that we mentioned and also go into Kristin's post and my article and look into those different methods because it's going to be different for every person out there. Now, lastly, going for walks. I kind of put that, it's kind of double, but like I often go for a walk in the city too. Just going out for a walk, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, it usually kind of recharges me quite a bit. If I really struggle writing, I go out. Before you know it, I'm like on my phone, I'm like writing down shit.
I'm the same way. I'm the same way.
Like as I'm walking, I'm like getting good ideas, And this morning I wrote like half an article, like walking basically. So yeah, very basic, like nothing crazy, nothing hippie, right? No, like weird stuff there.
No.
There's even like some supplements that can help us manage cortisol, but I purposely didn't write those down because I think we tend to kind of go for those options, right?
Yeah.
We're like,
No.
Let me just try these supplements first. But no, just go outside a little bit more first, right? Do less or chill on the couch or whatever works for you. So to kind of recap what we talked about today, we talked about what stress really is, right? The perceived stress as well as physical, acute stress versus chronic, and how it affects the body, how much you can handle, and how you can manage that load, right? If you look at those two different states, right? Rest and digest, the fight or flight, how much are you doing on the stress side and how much are you actually doing to counter that? Now, we also shared some of our personal favorites, and we talked a little bit about sleep and, loss of menstrual cycle, etc. Once again, stress becomes a problem when it's prolonged too much for too long, right? Just like with dieting and all that stuff. If you want to learn more about this, learn more about stress, if you want a little recap, check out my article. I'll link it in the show notes, as well as Kristin's post, which we'll also link. And we will talk to you guys next week.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening. If you want to help us grow the show, please make sure to leave us a 5-star rating or share this episode on your Instagram stories. Now, if at any point you feel like you need more help, you can always reach out to Kristin or myself directly via any of the links in our show notes, because we're here to help. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you in the next episode.